my name, not once. Not when they raised their glasses. Not when he smiled at his son. Not even when he toasted to legacy. I stood there, invisible. Like I had always been. Like Octavia Ridley never existed. But the moment a 3-star general walked in, stood tall in front of me, and saluted, every mouth in that ballroom forgot how to speak. Major General Ridley. And just like that, my father's silence shattered. I hadn't planned on staying long. The moment I stepped into that ballroom, the air felt too polished, too rehearsed, like a performance that had been practiced 1,000 times without me. People in tuxedos and sequin gowns moved like clockwork between trays of foie gras and string quartet crescendos. Not a single glance landed in my direction, not even a pause. I stood at the edge of the room, invisible by design. Eva had begged me to come. I wasn't sure if it was loyalty or guilt in her eyes when she handed me the invitation. Maybe both. Either way, I'd told her I'd think about it. What I hadn't told her was that I'd already ironed the jacket that night. On the stage, my father was beaming, 80 years old, still commanding a room like he was born for it. His voice rang through the speakers, smooth, confident, wrapped in generations of expectation. "Thank you for being here tonight," he began, lifting a glass. "This isn't just a celebration of age, it's a celebration of legacy. And tonight, I'm proud to name the future of Ridley Holdings." People leaned in, waiting. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. He turned toward Rupert, who stood next to the stage in a bespoke navy suit, already half smiling. My father lifted his glass again. "My son Rupert is the one true heir to the Ridley name, the only one with the vision and the loyalty to carry this legacy forward." No one clapped, not right away. They waited for the cue, the laughter, the music, the distraction from what wasn't being said. A champagne flute slipped from someone's hand and hit the marble floor. Maybe it was mine. And then, footsteps. Measured. Precise. Steel-tipped. Each step echoing louder than the last, until they stopped right in front of me. He saluted. His voice cut through everything. "Major General Ridley, ma'am, your signature is required on a level 5 clearance file." Silence fell like glass shattering, and for the first time in 20 years, every eye turned toward me, not because I existed, but because they had forgotten I ever did. The bees never asked questions. That's why I liked them. I had my hive boxes arranged in rows behind the cabin, tucked under the edge of the ponderosa pines. Every morning, I'd rise before the sun, suit up, and tend to them. Quiet, efficient, purposeful. No one cared who I used to be, and I let that become my shield. In Flagstaff, people knew me as the woman with the straight back and quiet hands who taught military history at the local community college. They called me Professor Ridley. They didn't know the ribbons tucked away in my cedar chest, or the names I carried silently, the ones that never made it home. I thought I had made peace with it. I thought disappearing on my own terms was enough. It wasn't always like this. 2 decades ago, I walked into my father's house as a newly promoted colonel, my shoulders still stiff from the ceremony. I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd be proud. He didn't even let me sit before he began. "You're a disappointment to the Ridley name," he said, barely looking up from his drink. "A daughter is supposed to marry or manage assets, not run off playing soldier." He tore up my name from the family trust that night, formally and emotionally. 3 months later, my mother passed. I was in Kuwait at the time. By the time I landed back in the States, the funeral had ended. My name hadn't been read in the eulogy, not even once. It was as if I had never belonged, so I left, with nothing, not a dollar, not a word, and for 20 years, I lived as if it didn't hurt, but it did. Of course it did. The knock was soft, almost uncertain. I opened the cabin door to the sound of rain, and a girl standing in it like she wasn't sure the world would let her exist. Black coat, wet hair, pale fingers gripping the strap of a soaked backpack. "Are you..." General Octavia Ridley? The words hit like a forgotten photograph. No one had said that rank aloud in years. I didn't answer, not right away. I was staring at a face that looked too much like her father. "I'm Eva," she said. "Rupert's daughter." Of course she was. "I overheard him on a call," she continued, voice trembling. "He's trying to sell Ridley Holdings to an international investment firm. I didn't catch all the details, but it sounded wrong. And dangerous." Her hands shook as she unzipped her backpack, pulled out a manila folder. Inside, a scanned document with what appeared to be my father's signature. It wasn't. I'd watched that man sign contracts for 20 years. The curve on the R was wrong. The tail was too long. Someone had forged it. "I'm not asking you to come back and fight for the company," Eva said, meeting my eyes. "I came because you're the only one with the authority and the spine to stop this." I studied her for a long moment. She couldn't have been more than 28, young, but not naive, scared, but not weak. I saw myself in her, the version of me I'd buried long ago. I nodded once. "Grab the dress uniform," I said. "We've got work to do." The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Heavy, cream-colored cardstock, gold-embossed letters, no rank, no title, just my name, Miss Octavia Ridley. The erasure was deliberate. Again. Inside, an invitation to my father's 80th birthday celebration. And a note, written in his unmistakable script. "If you have any dignity left, you should come and see where power truly belongs." I almost lit a match to it. But then I remembered the look in Eva's eyes the night she left, somewhere between defiance and fear. "You're the only person he's ever been afraid of," she'd whispered. 2 weeks later, I walked into the Hyatt Regency in Dallas, alone. No security escort, no press. Just a small wooden box in my purse, my mother's old camellia-shaped silver pin. The ballroom glowed gold, blindingly opulent. A banner hung above the stage, "The Legacy of Ridley, a New Era Begins." I scanned the guest list at the check-in table. My name wasn't there. They seated me near the emergency exit, at a table beside the catering staff. I watched as everyone else took their places in glittering gowns and sharp suits. No one noticed me. I might as well have been a ghost. My father stood center stage, proud as ever. He didn't glance my way, but I knew he saw me. "Rupert Ridley," he declared, "will carry on the Ridley legacy. Loyalty and vision define him, and those who've walked away from this family, well, they erased themselves." There was a beat of silence. Then, footsteps, measured, military. A man in a decorated dress uniform entered from the far end of the ballroom. He walked with precision, cutting through the crowd without a glance. He stopped directly in front of me, straightened, saluted. "Major General Ridley, ma'am, your clearance is requested for eyes-only Level 5 documents." The entire room froze. Even the music died. And suddenly, I was the only one anyone could see. A man in a gray suit followed closely behind and handed me a thick envelope. Stamped in bold, "Classified, eyes only, O8 authority required." I opened it slowly, intentionally. Every eye followed my fingers. Inside was a contract, a pending deal between Ridley Holdings and a Swiss investment firm called Orion North Ventures. But the deeper I read, the more familiar the hidden web became. Orion was a shell. The money traced back to multiple front companies with ties to Chinese defense contractors. On the final page, 2 signatures. Rupert's was real. The other, purporting to be my father's, was a forged, clumsy imitation. The R dragged too long. The slant on the D was off. I'd seen my father sign enough legal documents in my life to know when his pen wasn't the one holding the truth. I looked up. Whispers had already started among the military guests. A silver-haired senator rose quietly and approached me. "Is it true you once led Operation Prometheus?" I nodded. He turned to my father. "I supported your company for years because I believed you were a patriot. Seems I was wrong." The tension shifted like a seismic crack under marble floors. And then, another voice. A woman near the back, holding a small gimbal camera. "I'm streaming this live to the Capital Wire network," she announced, loud enough for all to hear. "That salute? 20,000 views and counting." My father remained seated. Rupert, however, was unraveling. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped. I stepped forward, lifting the document. "You tell me, who signed this?" "You wouldn't understand the complexity of it." "Try me." He said nothing. Across the room, a few relatives stood up and slipped out, the same ones who'd once whispered at Christmas dinners about the daughter who didn't belong. Now, they couldn't even meet my eyes. Then Eva appeared, stepping from behind the side curtain. She held a printed email chain, visibly shaking. "This is from Dad's office," she said. "It's him instructing the legal team to adjust the signature to match Grandpa's." Rupert froze. My father's face drained of color. I turned to him slowly. "You knew," I said quietly. "You kept quiet because you were afraid I'd come back, and everything you buried would rise to the surface." He didn't answer. No one did. But beneath the ballroom's golden lights, the silver camellia pinned to my chest glinted like a blade pulled halfway from its sheath. And this time, no one dared to look away. The tea had long gone cold, but I kept the cup in my hand, as if warmth could be willed back into it. In the other hand, the red envelope sat heavier than it should have. Its seal read, "Eyes only, level 5, clearance, 08+. I'd signed orders like this before. In Iraq, I'd authorized troop movements and high-risk extractions, but I'd never opened one that involved my own bloodline. Inside, a dossier on Orion North Ventures, the so-called Swiss investment firm vying for 40% of Ridley Holdings. Clean on the surface, filthy underneath, shell corporations, hidden accounts, direct ties to Chinese state-owned defense companies, ones already flagged by the Department of Defense. If this sale went through, a strategic piece of our radar chip supply chain would fall right into foreign hands. But what chilled me wasn't the ownership trail. It was the signature. It wasn't real. The Richard Ridley on that page had been cloned, digitally replicated from an old contract, carefully pieced together to look authentic. But it wasn't his hand. Not that it mattered, because someone still meant for it to look legal. I called Eva. She arrived pale, soaked in anxiety. "I found an internal message," she whispered. Rupert was messaging Orion's CEO. He called Grandpa a perfectly timed puppet. I didn't flinch. He's not wrong, but it's time to cut the strings. Eva hesitated. "If this goes public, my father will go to prison. If it doesn't, this country loses something far bigger." I stood, clipped the camellia pin to my collar. "You want to protect your family. I have to protect a whole nation." Later that night, a representative from the Civilian Defense Oversight Committee arrived unannounced. He handed me a folder and a question. "We need someone with credibility to step in as security advisor. But that means going public. No more hiding." If I accepted, I'd no longer be a ghost. I'd become a very inconvenient name in a very dangerous circle, including my father's. I said I'd sleep on it. But I already knew. Morning arrived sharp and bright, like it had something to prove. I pulled the dress uniform from its case, the fabric still crisp, medals tucked in the inside pocket, slid on the jacket, fastened the collar. The silver nameplate read, "Ridley, O. Madge, Jen, retired." I walked into Ridley Holdings without an appointment. No one stopped me. Word of the ballroom salute had traveled fast. They led me to the 22nd floor. Glass doors, beige walls, a silence padded with nervous energy. He was already there. My father. Alone in a boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city he thought he built. He didn't stand. "What do you want?" I placed the red envelope on the table. "The truth? It won't change anything." "No, but it'll expose everything." He didn't touch the file. He didn't need to. He already knew. Outside. My phone buzzed. Ava. Someone sent me a threat, she said, voice tight. An anonymous email. Said if I keep digging, they'll leak the files first and make it look like our family orchestrated the whole thing. I closed my eyes. There it was. This wasn't just about a betrayal. This was a battlefield. Money, influence, distraction, legacy. And I was standing in the middle of it. I called a press briefing, small, controlled, independent military reporters only. I stood behind the podium and said, I'm not here to take back a company. I'm here to take back the truth. My name doesn't belong on any backdoor deal. Neither does my mother's. An hour later, a call came in. Department of Justice. They were prepared to issue a temporary suspension order against Rupert within 24 hours. But they needed something more. A final push, the agent said. Something public. Something irrefutable. This can't look like a family feud. I looked at the calendar. 2 days until the legacy announcement gala. I nodded. Then I'll give them something they won't forget. I'll stand in front of every single one of them. One last time. The ballroom glowed brighter than it did a week ago. Rupert stood on stage, smiling like the crown was already his. My father sat front row, polished and smug. My silver nameplate caught the spotlight. Ava's hand squeezed mine. You sure? I nodded. Rupert began, voice loud and rehearsed. Today, I humbly accept the role of CEO of Ridley Holdings. I stepped onto the stage. No, I said. You don't. Gasps. I opened my case and laid out documents. The forged signature email. The audit. The defense memo. The Justice Department's court order. I didn't return to take control, I said. I came to end a 20-year silence. A court officer entered. Rupert Ridley, you are hereby suspended pending federal investigation. The room exploded. My father stood to interrupt. I looked him dead in the eye. Sir, with all due respect, this isn't your stage anymore. The spotlight moved and landed on me. The price of legacy 3 days later. The headlines were everywhere. Retired Major General Octavia Ridley exposes defense asset scandal. Ridley Holdings under federal investigation. Once disowned, now the guardian of national honor. The board demanded my father step down. Rupert awaited a federal court ruling. They invited me to join the interim board. I declined. I had only one condition. All disputed shares must be transferred to the Ridley Women Veterans Fund, dedicated to supporting former female service members in education and reintegration. And one more thing, I added. I nominate Eva Ridley for the Executive Leadership Program. She is the only rightful heir this company has. Several shareholders opposed the emotional decision, until the Department of Defense announced it would only continue contracting with Ridley Holdings if Eva joined leadership under the oversight of a neutral defense advisor, me. I was no longer on the sidelines, but I didn't need the spotlight anymore. I stood behind Eva now, something I never had behind me. A steady hand, a shield, a legacy. I came home to Flagstaff. The summer air had cooled, and the pine trees whispered with the wind. The silence wasn't empty, it was whole. My bees moved in steady patterns, wings humming like a memory I didn't need to chase anymore. Inside my cabin, everything was just as I left it. The old wooden table, the teapot, and on the shelf above the window, my mother's silver dahlia brooch gleamed quietly in the soft light. There was an envelope waiting by the door. Thick. Official. Signed by General Thomas J. Devereaux, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Thank you, Major General Ridley, for holding the line in silence when it mattered, and for breaking that silence when the country needed courage more than comfort. I read it twice, then laid it gently beside a photograph, one I hadn't touched in years. My mother and I, standing at Fort Bragg. I was 19. She was proud. Neither of us knew what the world would take from us, or what I'd eventually reclaim. I stepped onto the porch, wrapped in the cool morning air, poured myself a cup of tea. No stage, no applause, no microphone, no uniform today. Just me. and the woman I had finally made peace with. I didn't need anyone's salute anymore, because this time, I saluted myself. Not for the wars I'd fought, not for the silence I had broken, but for choosing to come home whole, even after everything had tried to break me.